This is ThinkTech Talks, and it is Wednesday. We're catching up with Kaka'ako as we always do from 3 to 4 every Wednesday. Today we're talking about Kaka'ako from a planning point of view with George Atta, who is the Director of Planning and Permitting for the City and County of Honolulu. George, we are honored to have you on the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be on the show.
So you were on our panel for the what was it? Finally Finding Our Future in Kaka'ako 3-4 weeks ago. That was great. And I think you lend a certain kind of special expertise in your role as DPP for the city, looking across the street, so to speak, to see what goes on in Kaka'ako. And Kaka'ako, I don't have to tell anybody how important Kaka'ako is. It is the jewel in the city's crown, or maybe, or may not be, as the case may be. And it is a test, I think, of how well we work together and how well we can envision and conceive of our own characteristics, our own persona as a city and as a people in the city. This is so important for all of us, and I think a lot of us recognize that. So, George, you've been watching this sort of thing for a whole lifetime.
I have been, actually. I mean, even as a kid growing up, we used to go there occasionally and travel through it, going to Alamana Beach Park. So, yes, I've seen the place grow.
Yeah. And you worked for Group 70 for quite some years?
Yeah, 25 years.
Ooh. And they were, well, I know Group 70 is involved all over the city, but I think they have some work in, or they have had work in Kaka'ako.
Well, they actually did the Wards Center renovation when it was still part of the Ward Estate, so the master plan and the town center plans. And then we also did some of the renovation at Ward Center, and we did some of the initial master planning for Kamehameha schools as part of Group 70.
Yeah, and then you moved from Group 70 to DPP, which is, I mean, to me, it's a natural. Well, it's better than a natural transition because you had the credentials, you had the experience, you saw it from the the business point of view, the developer point of view, and then you come to DPP and make that DPP, Department of Planning and Permitting, and you can see the whole bird's eye view of how this works and how it integrates with other parts of the city. Really important. Important that you're there right now.
Yeah, as planning director, I do get a holistic view of development on the island and see Kaka'ako as part of the whole shift from a suburban kind of growth pattern to a more urban kind of growth pattern along the rail corridor. So it's interesting to see, and then getting that broad perspective, I think helps me to make decisions about things in Kaka'ako, where although the city doesn't have jurisdiction, now that legislature passed a bill that places the planning director back on the board of directors of Kaka'ako, gives me input into how I think the area should develop in relationship to the rest of the city.
So you personally were on the HCDA board?
No, I wasn't.
Was your predecessor?
The planning director was previously on the board of directors, and then I forget which year it was. He was then taken off the board, so the planning director was no longer on the board. And now, with this year's legislation, the director is back on the board.
I'm glad. I mean, I really think that, questions have been raised for 30 years as to exactly why we need HCDA in the center. In fact, the most important part of our, development of Honolulu. And I guess the answer to the question 30 years ago was, well, the city's not moving fast enough. We need a special task force here, and HCDA is a task force, and we're going to do this special. But you really wonder if that was necessary, or whether it's been necessary over the past 30 years, because if HCDA was supposed to come in there and do magic, they haven't done it yet.
Yes.
So,
and this brings up the question, what was HCDA's function? Yeah. And they really were a development agency. They were not a land use regulatory agency, and so their role was to stimulate development in the area. And so now that it's finally happening after 30 years, people are getting a little backpedaling a little, thinking, whoa, what are you doing, HCDA? So it's kind of ironic.
It is ironic. That's the exact right word. Yeah. We ask for development, we give you development. What are you complaining about?
Right.
Well, one interesting question that flows out of that, which is actually one of the questions that came out of our discussion, finally finding our future, the Q&A machine.
Right.
And one of the interesting questions, well, if we have all this development, and it looks like it's going to get done in fairly quick time, After it's done, do we still need HCDA if we've already developed the place? You know?
That's always a question. The city's always ready and willing to take jurisdiction back if the state wants to give it, because at that level, once it's primarily a fully developed or mostly fully developed, it becomes more a land use regulatory role of government, and pushing development becomes a secondary function. And then at that level, maintenance of streets and sewers and connections and park maintenance, all of those things are basic municipal functions. I don't know that HCDA was designed to do that kind of a role. I suspect not, but it would have to evolve or change as a government agency. So that's an open question, and the city's more than willing to take it over when that time.
I'm glad to hear that. I mean, it's my personal view, but I think that should happen. You know, and I think of that every time I cross what I call Ground Zero, which would be not Oahe Street, but the street just before you get to the inside park. What is that? You know,
well, there's what, South Street, Keawe Street. I don't know. Coming from which direction?
Going Mackay, and then you start down Cook Street, and then there's a cross street right at the intersection there, at the corner of Mother Waldron Park.
That would, I think that's a
Pohukaina.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's Pohukaina and Cook I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
And it has attracted traffic. There's more traffic, way more traffic in Kaka'ako now. I'm not sure why, because these buildings haven't been really populated yet. But there's a lot more traffic. And I wrote a column about this once, George. I said, if you're going to have multiple stop signs, you have to have a plan for when you retire them and put in ordinary, red and green traffic lights.
Right.
And when the traffic gets really congested and everybody winds up, with 3 tiers of cars waiting for the other direction to go, I think it's time. I wrote that column almost 2 years ago.
Well, the interesting thing about Kaka'ako is actually, although the main corridors like Ala Moana and Kapiolani are very busy, if you go into the internal streets, they're not that congested.
That's true.
And so there's something about the I guess the density of the grid that the internal part sort of remains calm and and quiet relatively, considering how high volume Ward Avenue and Ala Moana is. So I think that creates a certain kind of ambiance inside pockets of Kaka'ako that I think is a good place to be.
Yeah, right now. And it does have a feeling of becoming, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
You know that it's going to change. You're not sure how exactly, but you stand there and you look around and you say, behold this place. It is ephemeral. It will change soon.
Yeah, well, I mean, clearly, I guess people get nostalgic about things as they are or were, but the fact is, over time, things change. I mean, talking about going back into old days, I still remember when the Honolulu Ironworks building was still there, and as a kid, just kind of going into this industrial district, and people had nostalgic thoughts about the old Honolulu Ironworks building.
And next to the Ironworks was the Hawaiian Armed Services Police. And I was in the service at the time, and they had the best steak lunch in town.
Oh, okay. I never went there, but yeah, all right. So.
Then there was the Harbor Light Cafe.
Right.
I think it was on South Street.
Yeah, and in fact, there were a bunch of eating establishments, and then guys like Gabby Pahinui used to kind of jam after work in Kaka'ako, and so a lot of that people remember, just those kinds of things, and it's a good place, but at the same time, obviously with the economy changing over time, it sort of became a slightly depressed place and started to look a little seedy.
It got stuck.
Yeah.
I wrote an article about tumbleweed on Ilalo Street. The
Yeah.
desert. Anyway, so you haven't actually been seated on the HCDA board yet. When do you expect that will happen?
I presume when the governor signs the legislation, probably in July would be officially when the law goes into effect, and so I think that's when it'll happen.
Nobody else on that board, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know for sure, but nobody else on that board is a planner and an architect who is familiar with this kind of district growth, area growth. Am I right?
Offhand, I can't remember who all of the people on the board, but Mary Alice Evans, who's the deputy at DBED, it has a planning background. Yeah, so
Okay.
she comes from, well, she used to be on the planning commission, city planning commission back in the 80s, and so she has planning background.
I can't help but think that your being seated there will have a salutary effect. If for no other reason than there's been so much trouble in the community about their decisions in the last couple of years.
I think having the planning director on, is important mainly because the place has to grow in a fashion that's integrated with the rest of urban Honolulu, and the planning director provides that framework. So not only the framework of it, but the directors from the director's position as allowing building permits and being aware of what the improvements are around that's going on around and the needs. In fact, because of the role, I also sit on the board of directors for the HART. So all the planning for HART.
So that would be a
so
good connection.
So the integration is important, and
before we started, we were ruminating about the comparisons and contrasts of Kaka'ako, as it is rolling out, if you will, with Waikiki. And I wonder what your thoughts are there, because is it the same? Is Waikiki and its development instructive in some way about how we deal with development issues in Kaka'ako?
I think it is. I mean, both are high-density urban neighborhoods, and then I remember I think to me Kaka'ako looks like it's where Waikiki was in the 70s maybe, and today Waikiki is mostly fully built out, and there's very few places for any large developments, and it's beginning to go through a redevelopment in some areas with, like for example, the old King's Village was developed about 40 years ago as a low-rise retail thing. Now there's plans to build a high-rise, hotel condo type of development. So it's built up, but it's being rebuilt at a higher density. I think Kaka'ako is where Waikiki was 30 years ago, and so you begin to see, I guess, nodes of high-rise development, the hot spots even within Kaka'ako. There are certain hot spots that are getting developed. Some of that is related to the land ownership, underlying land ownership. Some of it is partly the kind of market they're trying to attract. But it'll develop in nodes, and then slowly the lower density areas will become higher density, though I think the plan calls for the strip along Queen Street to remain light industrial and a lower type of development, and part of that the market will dictate how long that remains that way. But it's evolving in a similar fashion, and I think the thing that's instructive is that Waikiki, as a lot of people don't realize, that 40,000 people live in Waikiki. It's a residential neighborhood as much as it is a tourism destination, and so there's an urban lifestyle, a quality of life there, and I think we did some things well, some things not so well as to the residential quality of Waikiki. I think we can take some of those lessons and make Kaka'ako a better model of a high-density urban community.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. I mean, in my lifetime anyway, at one point Waikiki had miniature golf, remember? And it had theaters, lots of theaters, and it had International Marketplace, which was always a fun place to go. Even Jolly Roger was on the sidewalk. I mean, I know that's coming back a little, but the Waikiki was a place where local people could go and find comfort and solace and recreation. But over the years, that has diminished, and parking is a big problem, I think. A lot of people won't go there unless they're invited to a wedding or something, or some kind of thing in one of the big hotels. They won't go because they don't see it as a recreational place for local people. And I mean, I think that's a risk, don't you, that that we could have that in Kaka'ako would be even more profound, because Kaka'ako, the sort of the inherent implied promise of Kaka'ako is that it will be a recreational place for local people.
I think so, but I don't think Kaka'ako is in danger of becoming a Waikiki where the tourist population becomes such a factor that locals feel crowded out of it. Because you know, it's not the kind of market outside market is attracted is a kind of a residential high-end market on the waterfront side. But people don't realize, as they see all of the luxury condos that are being publicized, that there's a lot of affordable housing that's going up in Kaka'ako. You know, Marshall Hung's two towers are one. Sanford Cars in Kahea is coming up, and the Kamehameha School's mid-rise Block B projects. Most of those are geared towards local people, so there'll be a significant local population. And I think Kaka'ako as a destination is not a kind of, it's not trying to invent itself as a tourist kind of destination, so I don't think it'll get overrun with tourists. I think it will be a more mixed neighborhood where both local and visitor will have things to do over there.
You know what they say, George? From your lips to God's ears.
I'm an eternal optimist. See, so some people who have a more fearful, I guess, feeling about the future, you know, would say I'm just being naively optimistic that things will go well. But I think, you know, I think having said that, I think, you know, that it won't go the way, quite the way Waikiki. And I'm not putting Waikiki down because I think it's a great tourist destination. If you look at Kalakaua Avenue, it is crowded. It's probably one of the most traveled streets in the country.
Lots of pedestrians, for sure.
Pedestrian, and while, you know, it's tourist pedestrian for the most part, well, it's a tourist destination, so that it's performing the function it was, you know, planned for. Kaka'ako will have, I think, a different function. It will be a new kind of urban neighborhood. I think it'll be an experiment for Hawaii of, you know, of how you can have a urban neighborhood, high density, and still have a good quality of life. A place you can, you know, age in place, and multi-generational place where cars really are a secondary option. You don't really need a car. And I think, you know, and even in a technological sense, I mean, I view it as a place where, well, let's start getting more creative about the high rises. I mean, what about putting PV panels on the vertical walls, you know, and then why not having, you know, rooftop recreational or podium deck recreational? Why not do urban agriculture? You know, people always view in the old days cities as being dependent on the countryside for their food, and while that's still largely true in Europe, there people are talking about urban gardens and urban agriculture. And why not begin our experiments in urban agriculture in a high density area in Kaka'ako? I can see gardens on all kinds of rooftops, and maybe even the vertical green walls that we're seeing. I mean, I sometimes envision, you know, a guy who would normally be washing the windows on the skyscraper. He might be picking strawberries that are growing on the vertical walls. I mean, who knows? You know, I think it's wide open, and that it could be an exciting new kind of a high-density urban environment, and you know, we could lead it.
And it's not only the strawberries; it's the idea that you can grow strawberries on a vertical
and then you're
wall.
hanging on a scaffold, you know, up on a high rise, and it could be anything. But that, you know, just the idea of it. I mean, it's a possibility, and I know that the photovoltaic technologies are becoming much more efficient. So putting it, they don't all have to track the sun in order to make sense. They're becoming efficient enough that having them on the vertical walls catch enough of the sun to make it economic. And then the different types of micro wind turbines, you can put them on different parts of the buildings and take advantage of the wind tunnel. People will talk about, you know, towers creating wind tunnel effects, and it's true. So, well, you know, put these vertical wind turbines on it, and you know, make energy out of them. You know, every problem can become the solution to something else. So I think we have a lot of opportunities here.
We're going to take a short break, George. That's George Atta. He's the Director of Permitting and Planning and Permitting for the City and County. We're here on ThinkTech Talks. I'm Jay Fidell. We're catching up with Kaka'ako, and today we're talking about Kaka'ako from a planning point of view with George Atta. We'll be right back in a moment.
Hello, I'm Martin Despang, and I'm the host together with the one and only Ali Yamashita, and our show is called Urban Transcendence. And urban transcendence is about identifying where we have a unique situation of a vibrant city in one of the most beautiful natural environments. So how these two can coincide, sometimes conflict, how they could find reciprocity in the 21st century is what we're excited about. And we're planning on bringing in a diverse body of guests, both from the arts and the science and the established and the wise and the emerging generation. So hope you will join us. We'll always be on Thursdays from 1 to 2 p.m.
Okay, here we are. We're back. We're live with George Atta, the Director of Planning and Permitting for the City and County, who is going to be back on the HCDA board. I mean, the Director of Planning and Permitting will be back, and George will be back shortly to participate with that board, and that will be a good thing. And we're here talking about Kaka'ako. We're catching up with Kaka'ako as we do every Wednesday, 3 to 4 p.m. We're talking about Kaka'ako from a planning point of view. And before we had our break, George was talking about very, very interesting possibilities, for Kaka'ako, such as rooftop gardens, which actually, the governor talked about that a year or two ago. His wife likes that, and they're really excited about that. And in fact, this fellow named Kaka'ako, which we made a movie about, who is also on Pohukaina Street, in a little inside space he rents from KS, where he does, hydroponics, actually grows lettuce and things right now, and other people can do that. And then, as you mentioned, strawberries and vertical PV and who knows what. I mean, I've heard recently about these small windmills that are vertical windmills instead of big. And so who knows the possibilities? But the question is, we saw a groundbreaking with the the Waiea project, the Howard Hughes Corporation, and another related project, I think, in the Victoria Ward side of Kaka'ako a week or two ago, and it sounds like the train has left the station in terms of at least a number of buildings, and how much room is there? How many opportunities are there to do these really creative and pleasing things that are possible?
Well, I think people feel like the train has left the station, but in reality, if you look at the overall density of Kaka'ako, even counting all the projects that have been announced, there's lots of vacant spaces in Kaka'ako, and so while nobody wants to see a wall of high-rise across the whole of it, I think these early towers are probably, I'm glad they're moving forward, but they're probably just a part of the evolution about how a new urban form and lifestyle can develop. And so all it takes is, the first developer, for example, somebody were to say, do rainwater capture as part of their whole system on site, and somebody else, and this is partly a regulatory thing, if the city approved having packaged wastewater treatment plants, then we can recycle both gray water and capture rainwater, and where does that water go, right? Goes into gardens, goes into landscaping. So all of these technologies are evolving right now, and once you evolve them, the issue like where does the water go, where does gray water go, you have a problem. But then that problem generates a solution as to, and this is where urban gardens or creating, a kind of edible landscape, whatever, all become part of the solution.
Edible landscape. You heard it here on ThinkTech.
I think as you look at it, and if you were to actually look in the area view of Kaka'ako, you'll find that actually it's the least dense part of the cityscape. Downtown Honolulu is very dense. And then the Ala Moana is partially dense, but then Waikiki is very dense. And in between is Kaka'ako, where you have a node of high-rises right where the Nauru Tower area and the Howard Hughes, and then sporadic towers here, and a kind of concentration out by Cook Street, Kapiolani. But it's sporadic, and there's lots of open spaces. So that's not going to get developed in the next 5 years.
Those spaces.
Yeah, it's going to take another 10, 15, 20 years before those spaces start to fill out. And so we still have time to preserve view corridors, make sure that we don't lose all of the open space quality. And there's still time to start to rethink this whole notion of mixed use. And this is where the train and the whole idea of mixed use is becoming a growing phenomenon. So when you talk about a building, it's no longer, oh, this is a residential condo, this is a office tower. It's more and more there's mixed uses going on. And when you start to talk mixed uses, you begin to see all kinds of other possibilities that of both architecturally and in terms of the social spaces that are created. And I think that this is where, to me, it's exciting. It's the challenges make it exciting in a way. You're going to try to do all this in a tight space. To me, it's just like a poet or an author who views haiku or sonnet, which is a very formal structure, and you have to stay within that formal structure. But the struggle to work within that formal struggle for the creative people, that at the end of the day, it actually helps them become better because it forces them to think harder to make it fit in that sonnet structure. I think the tightness of an urban space, if it's treated in that way, it could lead to great creativity in both design and function that I'm sort of looking forward to seeing.
Well, yeah, but I'm returned to my question about is there an opportunity for, say, the public, who I think ought to think about it. They ought to be aware, they ought to participate. In the past, they may not have done that, but this is a good chance, a good opportunity for the community to come together and achieve a better result. I mean, everybody has to be reasonable, but achieve a better result. So one of the things been raised is, we only have the one Mother Waldron Park.
Right.
KS has done its indoor park, but that's indoors, and it's not really a park. I mean, it's got a really smart idea, but I wouldn't call it a Mother Waldron Park. And so you get to the question of open spaces, and so you have density. And then, I don't know what the ratio is, but there's a ratio somewhere about how much open space you have. So let's assume that somebody out there says, well, I want more open space, I want a park, I want more, give me another Mother Waldron Park in there somewhere, and then I'll feel good. Query, where does that land come from? How you can't do open spaces without space. Mm-hmm. And now, if all the land is accounted for and it's all expensive and getting more expensive while we watch. I mean, there was a thing on it was a KHON last night about how condominiums in that area had gone up 60% in price in the last, I don't know how long, a few months.
I believe it.
Yeah, I believe it too. I mean, so the Howard Hughes project is, 2, 3, their penthouse is $50 million. Woo!
Yeah.
So this has an effect. So the question is, where is that land going to come from to do the open spaces? I know you're right when you say it has to be within a defined structure like a sonnet, but you still need some space.
Right.
Where do you get it from?
Well, I mean, obviously in the Kaka'ako models, most of the ones we're seeing is like a 30, 40-foot podium, which, and then the tower itself, it doesn't take the whole block. It usually takes like maybe 1/5 of the block, and it goes up straight. So at the top of the podium, you obviously have space. The issue is that's not open to the public. Well, it could be, theoretically, so that's one area where you can get more space, open space. The other thing is, I think we have to look at the connection of Kaka'ako to these adjacent areas. Obviously, Kaka'ako Makai Park is an important open space, and so is Alamona Park. They're both Makai of the area. But we should look Mauka as the same thing, the McKinley High School field and Blaisdell Center, Thomas Square. There are parks Mauka side. And so if we can create good walkable linkages between Kaka'ako and these both directions.
I see, and I absolutely agree with that. So if you have an open space here and an open space there, and you can see those open spaces, it's like it gets delivered to you. It becomes part of your experience.
Right, and even the podium decks, which are be 30 or 40 feet up, most of the residences will be higher than that. You can see down onto the podium deck. And the other thing to remember, and the mayor sometimes reminds us that our streets are our biggest public open spaces. So by making our streets more into a complete streets, kind of a combination garden environment, then the urban density is not so oppressive. So if our streets become boulevards with tree-lined boulevards, and it's very enjoyable to to walk. The street then becomes a linear park. It's how we design it. You know, if it's
because there's greenery there.
Yeah, and if it's not just focused on moving automobiles, it can be a multimodal and a linear park. And so, part of that is in design of the whole system of transportation, but part of it is in the very specific street setback and building setback lines that DPP and HCDA have control on that side of it too. So there are opportunities like that to transform our streets into linear parks.
I'm so happy you're on that board, or you will be on that board. I'm so happy, you know, that you're DPP right now, because I think we're at a turning point. This is a historical moment, you know. Kaka'ako brings together maybe things that, you know, that were waiting to happen. And although there's a lot of strife about it, and from some quarters, fact is that we could be making a beautiful sonnet here.
I think so. I hope so. I mean, I mean, the potential is there. Huh?
Yeah. One more break. Forgive me.
Okay. No.
Okay. That's George Atta, the Director of Planning and Permitting for the city. We're catching up with Kaka'ako, talking about Kaka'ako from a planning point of view today here on ThinkTech Talks. We'll be right back. I'm Jay Fidell. That's Sharon Moriwaki of the Hawaii Energy Policy Forum. And every Wednesday we have Hawaii, the State of Clean Energy. We've been doing it for some time now, and we have some fantastic guests on there, unbelievable guests who give us insight into what is going on in a very complex, sometimes very confusing, sometimes very disappointing area of progress in the state. So we love doing this. We love meeting them. We love talking to them. We love having their ideas out on the table. So maybe, just maybe, we can all make some sense of what's going on. Sharon, what do you think?
I think that's absolutely correct. We enjoy ourselves meeting with all these people and hearing about the energy and the state of clean energy, and hopefully we advance clean energy for the state. So it's terrific. Join us.
Okay, it's every Wednesday. Okay, Wednesday is Energy Day. Every Wednesday, 4 to 5 p.m. Hawaii, the State of Clean Energy, here on ThinkTech Hawaii. We'll see you there. We're back. We're live. We're having a great discussion with George Atta, DPP, the Director of Planning and Permitting for the city, who is going to be on the HCDA board very soon. And we're catching up with him on Kaka'ako from a planning point of view today here on ThinkTech Talks. So we are remiss in not discussing certain issues about integration and the effect of rail and the connection with the waterfront. Let's take a little time for that, George. First, the integration with the rest of the city. Here we're going to have this, hopefully, you know, park-like streets, complete streets with greenery, with bike paths and lots of walking space, not only cars. This is going to be human scale, hopefully. But how are we going to integrate that with all three sides? You know, Mauka and then Eva and Diamond Head. How are we going to make, you know, sort of feather that into the rest of the community?
Well, I mean, the HCDA line, of course, is an imaginary line. It's a regulatory line. The physical aspects, there's no line or wall dividing them. So I think the opportunity, and complete streets definitely is one of the key ingredients. As we're looking at Ward Avenue, and out of the initial planning for our NBC's thing, we're thinking about Ward Avenue from the Honolulu Museum of Art all the way down to Keoala Basin, becoming a more complete street-like. So more trees, more bicycle paths, more retail, commercial at ground level to make it an interesting thing. And that would start from the Mauka side at the Honolulu Museum and run right through Kaka'ako. And that would be a thread that would, I think, connect the two. I think we have to treat our streets like both the Kapi'olani Boulevard and Ala Moana. They can be barriers. Big, wide streets can be barriers, but so we have to think how we can cross these wide streets and then integrate them in Kaka'ako. I know Howard Hughes is talking about creating a Maukamakai path through their properties, and Kamehameha Schools is doing the same thing. So many of the larger landowners are thinking of ways to create connecting threads through Kaka'ako, and I'm all supportive of those efforts. And
tree-lined boulevards.
Tree-lined boulevards, and some of it is more like Woolworths and walking trails where the car is not there. It's really
Promenade.
yeah, promenade type, and then along the way, treating it just as the ancient Hawaiians had the Ahupua, Makamakai trails, and the people are beginning to look at modern land uses and have a similar kind of integration and linkage, and I think that's all possible. I think rail will be an integrating connector because it's the two stations in Kaka'ako are just part of a 20-mile long segment, and so when people ride the rail, there won't be no line that says, "Oh, you are now entering Kaka'ako." It'll be just the next station, and there's no line between the stations. And Kaka'ako may play an important role because as the rail is getting built up, and we're beginning to look at, well, what about the next phase of rail? Is it that's going to Manoa and here Kaka'ako is a potential option because the end station in Ala Moana Station is a very tight place, and whether the extension line should go from Ala Moana to Manoa, or should it
peel off
from one of the earlier, the city center station? That's a question that's being discussed now. So Kaka'ako may play a role in those extensions as well. And
you sit on HART.
I sit on the board of HART, so the discussion is played.
You know, I remember, George, the plan was to go toward Pi'ikoi, but then make a left turn one block before that, or half a block before that, so that you could get a track, sort of an S-turn, get a track down Kona Street for the close. And I remember thinking that, gee, that was going to be a big condemnation in order, or an acquisition, if you will, in order to get that block, because trains don't turn sharp. They need a lot of room to turn. Well, at that location, that'd be a possibility to make that sweeping turn up Mauka.
Right, at Pi'ikoi before it gets into the high rise. That potential is there. I think we're just starting, because up until now people focused on the 20-mile length. They really weren't thinking of extensions. But now that the construction is on the way, and I've always told the HART staff, you guys got to tell me where the extension is, because as DPP director, I approve the building permits, and if you don't tell me where the line is going, I might approve a 350-foot high rise right in the path of the train. So I've been saying that for a year now, and the discussion is finally starting, and so that will be an important discussion about where the extension starts.
But this brings up the whole thing. When you talk about sort of feathering the edges and integrating, this kind of development with what's on the outside of the boundaries of Kaka'ako, it raises in my mind one thing that you wouldn't think originally, and that is when you have development happening at a high rate of activity in a box, it affects things outside the box.
Yes.
And if I'm a landowner, for example, outside the box, I think to myself, gee, I want to be in on that. I want to develop my property too. So it sort of feathers itself, except that when we're outside the box, that's that's DPP. So you can have a lot of influence on that.
Well, I think
design
we're seeing that.
Input,
I think we're already seeing that, because while people are focusing on the development within Kaka'ako, and in point of reality, in that same 1.5 year period that I've been there, one Kapiolani came in with a building permit, is under construction, and that's outside of Kaka'ako. I've had discussions with Korean group Samku, which is the parcel just Mauka of General Growth. It's a low density. I've had that discussion. We approved the Atkinson YMCA property, so they're going to be building a high-rise there. So I don't know if you call it development pressure, or just the developer community sees what they see in Kaka'ako, and they're building outside of Kaka'ako in a similar kind of thing, and they are related to the rail in the sense that they're all within a half mile of the rail station. But so these built, and there's another new developer that's right across from the convention center, and I know that he's going to come in for another one. So these are all outside of Kaka'ako, but they're high-rise urban density projects, and which we want around the rail station. So we're looking for these kinds of projects around the rail station.
Yeah. So, but what's interesting is that at the end of the day, when you look at this, bird's eye view, the development is not limited in any way to Kaka'ako. It's happening. Kaka'ako is fomenting other development all around it. So the whole center of the city is in transition right now.
It is. Yeah, we're definitely seeing a building boom because every now and then I count the construction cranes. And when I was in Vancouver a few weeks back, I was counting construction cranes in Vancouver, and I'd say we have a similar number. And Vancouver is in a construction boom. So, you know, some people get upset with the intensity of this thing, but it's the kind of thing that, you know, it comes in ebbs and flows with the market, and you know, you have to catch when it's happening. It's not a question of stopping it. It's really a question of managing it, or you know, focusing that development energy in the places that you want it to go.
Capturing it.
Captured in the right place. You know, if it's all over the place, it can become an eyesore. But if you can focus it in the places where you want the density to go, I think that's an opportunity at that point in time.
And somehow all of this is related to the waterfront. I remember Ted Lieu and D-Bed were trying to develop a kind of path from Aloha Tower all the way to Waikiki, through Kaka'ako, or through Kewalo Basin, all that, through Ala Moana for that matter, which didn't, you know, that didn't happen, not any part of it. It's interesting that other, you know, parts of it, aside from the A and B project, could have happened. But at the end of the day, nothing, zero happened. So the question I put to you is how, you know, we had a problem with Aloha Tower and downtown. The Ala Moana tended to be a major barrier for, you know, what do we call it, crossing. How do we blend Mauka and Makai so that one feeds the other? And I think you will agree that when you add a waterfront property onto a development area, you enhance everything.
I think you do, yeah. I think that we in Honolulu have not traditionally done a good job of creating a more vibrant, you know, waterfront. In some places we've done okay, but in places like Kewalo Basin, which could have been a gem, you know, it's deteriorated from the old days in the 50s and 60s. I mean, it was a much more vibrant place, Fisherman's Wharf, and the water was, but you know, it has gone downhill since then. And if you go to the really admirable cities on the mainland, most of them have vibrant waterfronts. In San Francisco, the Fisherman's Wharf area, in their redevelopment, their shoreline areas have been part of the redevelopment. I know in Vancouver at Bainbridge Island, you know, and people living on houseboats right next to Bainbridge Island. So there've been a lot more innovative and creative in the way they interact and use the waterfront. I think Kaka'ako is a waterfront community, and people don't think of it mainly because there's two very large parks that sort of you know, acts sort of as a buffer,
but destination parks,
right? Yeah. So that the buildings don't come right up to the waterfront, but at the same time, there's the Honolulu Harbor on one side, and you know, Kewalo Basin and the Alawai. So there's you know, enough bones there to create, I think, a connection between all of them, and that's, I think, a challenge. As you say, it's an idea that many people have had over decades now, actually, and it hasn't gone very far. But it's you know, we should rethink that whole thing. I mean, when I think of great cities and I think of places like Sydney, and you see the Opera House right there, it becomes an iconic symbol of the city, right? As Aloha Tower used to be the symbol of the city, but now it's dwarfed by all the high-rises.
And unavailable.
Yeah,
you know?
right.
So I just want to tell you that I also recently went to Canada.
Oh, okay.
We didn't stop in Vancouver except in the airport, but we went to Kelowna, which is midway in British Columbia, and there's a big lake there called Lake Okanagan, huge big lake, and the city of Kelowna, which is 200,000-300,000, is on that lake, and they have done a beautiful job. They made a wilderness area, preserving all the ecology, and with walkways everywhere. It is a delight to be there. It's that same kind of awareness, that consciousness about how important the water is and the city's edge, and to make it, you know, to make it friendly for people, to make it recreational on a human scale and so forth. But my idea that I wanted to share with you is how do you get across Ala Moana? Because it's a bustling So I have an idea. My idea is a modified barn stance. My idea is if so you could cook and coral are a block apart.
Right.
But suppose you made one big crosshatch between those two streets, you know, and you let people be in that area and walk, you know, unharassed.
I mean, I think that has possibility. You know, I think I was once shown a photo of I think one of the North Midwestern cities in the 1903 or 1913, and it showed trolley cars, trucks, cars, and people all over the street, and there's no crosswalk. And the person making the commentary was saying that, you know, at the turn of the 1900s, that there was no such thing as jaywalking. That term was not there, and why? Because everybody used the street, pedestrians, cars, thing. It wasn't for the cars; it was for everybody. And so, crossing the street through any part of the street, it was not illegal because you know. So, in a sense, what you're saying is to turn that block of you know, between Coral and Cook, and everybody can cross there and things. So. And I think the hazard part would be mitigated if, as you approach it, drivers know, you know, even though Ala Moana is a high arterial, that when you're coming in this section of Ala Moana, you got to slow down because it's not the same. You share that street with bikes and pedestrians, and so the cars know they have to slow down. And then, you know, as you say, like a barn stance, you know, there are periods when the pedestrian can cross anywhere on the thing, and then the traffic continues. I think it's a possibility. I think it's part of the idea that the streets are not just for vehicles. It is for everybody. It's a public open space essentially, and we ought to treat it, you know, more multifunctionally than just driving cars through the thing.
The law of the broken paddle. Ever hear that?
Yes, King Kamehameha the Great. You know, so. Yeah, we can learn a lot from the old wisdom.
So, you know, it seems to me that, as I mentioned before, more than any project to date, this project is ours. I mean, when I say ours, I mean it's all of ours in terms of making input to it, and it's all of ours in terms of enjoying or not the result that comes out of it in the next 5-10 years.
Right.
It could make this city more wonderful than anybody can imagine.
I think so.
So what is your advice to the public about this? How do they handle it? I mean, we can't have an argument on everything.
Right.
We have to some constructive process. How do we achieve this in a sort of social sense?
I think, yeah, I mean, I think the word process that you use is the critical thing. It's not really even about plans or specific buildings or anything, because you know, if it's about projects, then there'll be people who hate it and people who love it, and it gets into an antagonistic thing. So if we change the process so that more people can get engaged in it, I think that's something, even as a DPP director, we're trying to figure out how to engage the public. And our traditional methods of newspaper notices and stuff is not getting there. Even the neighborhood board system, when you look at the attendance in most of them, it's not reaching the public. We know about the social media that seems to be capturing broader segments, but how do you take social media and use it in a decision-making process? That's another issue, and I don't know the answer to it, but I think we need a broader engagement about more fundamental issues. It's not just project-based things, but more like, you know, how should the streets be used? What kind of open spaces do we want within a community, and who should pay for it? And again, in the who should pay for it thing, we got to get out of the mindset of, let the developer pay for it because he's making a ton of money. Because I mean, having come from the private sector, I know that's not always true. Sometimes some developers make a ton of money,
some go bust.
Some can go bust. So to say they can pay for it is not only not true, but it's poor public policy, because then when you tie the method of improvement to a private entity, you then tie the pace and rate of your change to the private entity and to the market. So, and government should not be dependent on the market. When on an up cycle, they can do all their improvement, and on down cycle they do very little. You know, that's not a good model. And I think we need the government economic model as well as the government public participation model needs evaluation, and I don't have the answer to it, but I know that those two areas can change the way we both look at development, and hopefully the greater engagement can result in a kind of a more creative kind of vision for the city. I hope so. You know, that's.
George, it's a delight to talk to you, and an honor too. Thank you so much for your thoughts and your vision for Kaka'ako, and for the way things work in general. I just want to mention before we close that on July 1st we're having a gubernatorial forum on Kaka'ako in the Capitol Auditorium at 5 p.m. With the idea that people would like to hear what the gubernatorial candidates have to say. We've invited them all, and hope they will come down and express their vision for Kaka'ako. And I hope you come down at least to observe.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, George. It's George Atta, the Department of Planning and Permitting Director in the city and county. We're catching up with Kaka'ako. We're talking about Kaka'ako from a planning point of view, and I would like to do it again. So,
Yeah.
thanks, George.
Well, the gubernatorial discussion could have a lot of focus on it.